It is 3 in the morning, exactly 72 hours into the United States Army Ranger School. You are kneeling in the freezing Georgia mud, operating on zero sleep and exactly 800 calories, forced to make a command decision that dictates if you graduate or repeat the entire phase. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell. We cover the stories the history books skip. You don't want to miss what's coming next. I served nearly 20 years in the Special Operations community, executing missions that remain classified in windowless vaults. I came back with titanium hardware in my spine and a military disability rating, and now this channel is my sole occupation. I share the reality of what it takes to survive in the worst conditions on Earth. I share what I know you watch, and that is the exchange. Today we are analyzing the 61-day leadership and combat skills crucible conducted at Fort Moore, Camp Merrill, and Eglin Air Force Base. The civilian public possesses a fundamental misunderstanding of what a United States Army Ranger actually is. There is a massive operational and administrative difference between being a Ranger qualified soldier and being assigned to the 75th Ranger Regiment. The 75th Ranger Regiment is a dedicated special operations strike force that requires candidates to pass the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, known as RASB. Ranger School, conversely, is the Army's premier combat leadership course open to officers and enlisted personnel from conventional infantry units, armor divisions, and even foreign militaries. Graduating Ranger School earns a soldier the Ranger Tab, a piece of cloth worn on the left shoulder. This tab does not automatically grant entry into the 75th Ranger Regiment. It certifies that the individual possesses the cognitive discipline to effectively lead a platoon-sized element while their biological systems are experiencing catastrophic, sustained failure. Because the Army requires its conventional officers to understand light infantry tactics under severe duress, young lieutenants from regular airborne units train directly alongside enlisted Special Forces candidates. The rank structure is completely stripped away on day one. A captain might be assigned as a rifleman carrying a heavy machine gun, while a 20-year-old corporal is designated as the squad leader. The Ranger instructors evaluate leadership mechanics, not existing military rank. The physical attrition begins before the candidates ever touch a weapon, starting with the Ranger Physical Assessment Test, or RPAT. To even begin the course, a candidate must execute 49 perfect push-ups within 2 minutes. The Ranger instructors enforce an absolute standard of biomechanical perfection, requiring the candidate's chest to break the plane of their elbows on every single repetition. If the candidate's back sags by 1 inch, or if their elbows fail to lock out entirely at the top, the instructor simply stops counting. Following the push-ups, the candidate must execute 59 perfect sit-ups in 2 minutes. They must then run a 5-mile course over rolling asphalt in exactly 40 minutes or less. The final gate of the RPAT requires 6 strict dead hang pull-ups, with 0 momentum generated from the lower body. Documented Army data shows that nearly 10% of every Ranger class is eliminated on this initial physical assessment alone, failing to meet the baseline standard before day one officially begins. Those who survive the RPAT immediately transition to the Combat Water Survival Assessment. Candidates are forced to walk blindly off a 15-foot diving board into a deep pool while blindfolded and wearing heavy combat equipment. They must remove their blindfold and weapon underwater, surface, and swim 15 meters without displaying any signs of physiological panic. The military utilizes this assessment because panic in deep water is a direct biological indicator of an inability to suppress the amygdala under stress. Candidates who fail to manage their hypercapnia, the buildup of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream, and thrash wildly in the water are immediately dropped from the course. The surviving candidates are then officially inducted into the Benying phase. This first 20-day phase is designed to assess physical stamina and baseline squad-level infantry tactics. The apex of the physical assessment during this phase is the Darby Queen obstacle course. The Darby Queen is a 1-mile track carved into the dense Georgia woods containing exactly 25 massive wooden and rope obstacles. It is not designed to measure speed. It is engineered to exhaust every major muscle group through complex, multi-plane movements. Candidates approach the course after enduring days of severe sleep deprivation and relentless physical punishment. The first major obstacle is the Weaver, a pyramid of heavy horizontal logs. Candidates must snake their bodies over and under alternating logs without ever allowing their knees or elbows to touch the wood. This requires immense core stabilization and rapidly depletes the glycogen stores in the latissimus dorsi and abdominal muscles. Documented injury data from Fort Moore indicates a high prevalence of intercostal muscle strains and severe abrasions occurring exactly at this station. The course immediately forces candidates onto the Tarzan, a suspended traverse requiring them to swing from ropes and grip horizontal beams hanging 30 feet above the dirt. Because their grip strength is already degraded by lactic acid from the Weaver, candidates routinely lose mechanical friction and fall. Further down the mile, candidates face the Dirty Name, a complex jumping obstacle requiring them to leap from a low log to a higher suspended log. The deceleration forces upon landing generate intense kinetic shock through the patellar tendon, resulting in frequent knee injuries and shin contusions. The ranger instructors are not simply recording completion times on their clipboards. They are evaluating the psychological posture of candidates facing absolute physical failure. If a candidate successfully clears the skyscraper, a massive vertical wooden wall, but fails to turn around and physically haul their exhausted teammate over the apex, they fail the leadership evaluation. The cadre deliberately tracks whether a candidate prioritizes their individual time over the structural integrity of their squad. Following the obstacle course, the bennying phase culminates with a 12-mile foot march. Candidates carry a minimum of 35 pounds of dry equipment in their rucksacks, plus a primary weapon, helmet, and load-bearing vest, bringing the total carried weight close to 60 pounds. The time standard is exactly 3 hours, requiring a sustained pace of 15 minutes per mile over uneven, sandy terrain. This is not a walking pace. It requires the candidate to execute the Ranger Shuffle, a grueling, high-impact jog that destroys the cartilage in the lower extremities. Physiological data collected at the 3-hour mark of a loaded foot march demonstrates a severe drop in blood plasma volume and extreme muscular micro-tearing in the calves and hamstrings. During the final mile, the human body enters a state of deep anaerobic threshold. The central nervous system struggles to fire the motor neurons in the legs, causing the boots to drag in the dirt and increasing the risk of catastrophic tripping hazards. Candidates who miss the 3-hour time standard by a single second are immediately dropped from the course, regardless of their previous performance. The narrative spine of Ranger School is the deliberate weaponized application of sleep and caloric deprivation. This is not arbitrary torture. The Army explicitly utilizes deprivation to strip away the candidate's social veneer and expose their true baseline character under combat friction. Documented accounts establish that Ranger students average between 0 and 4 hours of sleep per night for 61 consecutive days. During peak operational phases, candidates will burn an estimated 5,000 to 6,000 calories every 24 hours. They are provided with roughly 2,200 calories in the form of 1 or 2 field rations. This creates a severe, sustained caloric deficit. The body rapidly exhausts its fat stores and begins cannibalizing its own muscle tissue to convert proteins into usable glucose for the starving brain. Army medical research demonstrates a terrifying decline in cognitive performance between week 1 and week 3 of Ranger School. By the 3rd week, the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for logic and tactical reasoning, is severely impaired. Candidates routinely experience microsleeps, hallucinating enemy combatants in the trees or falling asleep while walking with a loaded weapon. It is exactly in this state of profound neurological impairment that the candidates are graded on their ability to execute complex ambush and raid operations. To ensure that candidates cannot hide their character flaws from the instructors, the Army relies heavily on the peer evaluation system. At the end of every phase, each squad member must rank every other member of their squad from best to worst. They must provide concrete documented justifications for their rankings, detailing who took extra weight on the patrols and who fell asleep on security. You cannot fake leadership to the men suffering directly beside you. If a candidate receives a peer evaluation score below 60%, they are categorized as a peer failure. Statistical data indicates that peer evaluations account for a massive percentage of eliminations in the first phase. Candidates who hoard food, who refuse to carry the heavy radio, or who lash out in anger when they are exhausted are ruthlessly identified and purged by their own teammates. The social dynamics of extreme shared deprivation demand absolute altruism, or the squad will mathematically eliminate you. Those who survive the peer evaluations and the patrols of Bennying phase board a bus to Camp Merrill in Dahlonga, Georgia. This initiates the mountain phase, a 21-day evolution focusing on military mountaineering and continuous long-range combat patrols. The terrain shifts from flat pine forests to steep, jagged elevation changes in the Appalachian Mountains. Gravity becomes the primary adversary. Before candidates are allowed to patrol, they must pass the lower mountaineering evaluation. They are tested on their ability to tie specific, highly technical knots under severe time constraints, including the figure-8 retrace and the bowline. They must demonstrate mechanical proficiency in building rope bridges and executing vertical rappels. A single improperly dressed knot mathematically reduces the tensile strength of a climbing rope by 50%, resulting in a safety failure and an automatic elimination from the phase. Once certified on the ropes, the squads deploy into the mountains for days at a time. The physical weight of the rucksacks increases exponentially as candidates must carry heavy climbing ropes, pitons, and cold weather gear. The attrition rate in mountain phase is driven heavily by the sheer physical destruction of the human chassis. The steep ascents force the cardiovascular system to operate near its maximum heart rate for hours, while the steep descents transfer thousands of pounds of kinetic force directly into the knee joints. Mountain phase breaks men that Bennying could not because it introduces the agonizing variable of unpredictable freezing weather. A platoon might begin a patrol sweating in 60-degree heat and find themselves caught in a freezing rainstorm at the summit 4 hours later. The combination of wet uniforms, low caloric intake, and zero sleep pushes candidates into the early stages of hypothermia. The cadre evaluate whether a student leadership team can maintain security perimeters and execute ambushes when their fingers are too numb to manipulate the safety selectors on their rifles. Candidates who secure their go grades in the mountains travel to Eglin Air Force Base for the final crucible, the Florida phase. This 18-day phase focuses on small boat operations, airborne insertions, and platoon-level raids in a dense jungle and swamp environment. The terrain is dominated by knee-deep mud, stagnant water, and dense vegetation that limits visual lines of sight to less than 10 meters. The physical movement requires candidates to drag heavy Zodiac boats through the mud and cross deep, blackwater rivers in the dead of night. The environmental hazards in Florida are entirely distinct from the mountains. After-action reports consistently document encounters with alligators and venomous water moccasins during night patrols. Candidates are forced to wade through chest-deep swamps for hours, exposing their bodies to waterborne pathogens. The continuous exposure to moisture rapidly deteriorates the skin on the feet, causing severe immersion foot, commonly known as trench foot, which physically rots the epidermis. Furthermore, the insect exposure in the Florida swamps is psychologically devastating. Candidates are swarmed by mosquitoes while lying in ambush positions for hours. Because any physical movement will compromise their concealment and result in a failed grade, candidates must allow the insects to bite their faces without swatting them. The Florida phase attrition pattern often shifts away from physical fitness failures and heavily toward medical drops resulting from severe infections and soft tissue damage. For the candidates who fail a graded patrol or fall short on peer evaluations, the Army offers the recycle system. A recycle means the candidate is not dropped from the course, but must repeat the entire 20-day phase from day one. Documented statistics reveal that a substantial percentage of all Ranger School graduates recycled at least one phase during their time at the course. A standard 61-day course can easily stretch into 90 or 120 days of continuous physical torture for a recycled candidate. The psychological profile of a man who accepts a recycle is profoundly different from the man who quits. When an instructor offers a starving, freezing candidate the choice to go back to a warm bed or to stay in the woods for another 3 weeks, the amygdala screams for comfort. The men who return to the course demonstrate a psychological resilience that the Army highly values. Army retention and performance data indicates that recycled Ranger graduates perform with extreme reliability in subsequent combat assignments, having proven their emotional baseline cannot be broken by repeated failure. To earn a graduation certificate, candidates must successfully navigate the go-no-go grading system. Every candidate is assigned multiple leadership positions throughout the course, rotating as squad leader, platoon sergeant, or platoon leader. The Ranger instructors follow the patrols and grade the student's ability to issue a 5-paragraph operations order, coordinate movement, and execute actions on the objective. A candidate must receive a certain number of passing-go grades to advance to the next phase. A no-go is often the result of failing to maintain accountability of personnel and equipment. If a platoon leader orders his men to move out but fails to realize a sleeping candidate was left behind in the brush, it is an automatic failure. If a leader cannot formulate a coherent tactical plan because their brain is starved of glucose, or if they fail to establish 360-degree security during a halt, they receive a no-go. The instructors do not grade the outcome of the simulated firefight. They strictly grade the mechanical execution of infantry doctrine. When a candidate secures their final go in the Florida swamps, they earn the right to march across the parade field at Fort Moore for the tab pinning ceremony. Their uniforms are clean, their heads are shaved, and their bodies are visibly emaciated. They have lost an average of 20 to 30 pounds of muscle mass. But the physical destruction is temporary, while the administrative certification alters their military career permanently. In the conventional Army, the career trajectory difference between a tab-wearing officer and a non-tab officer is mathematically stark. Promotion boards heavily favor infantry officers who have graduated Ranger School, viewing the tab as a baseline requirement for commanding troops in combat. Furthermore, statistical analysis shows a direct correlation between Ranger School graduates and successful selection rates in Special Forces assessment and selection. The psychological hardiness forged in the 61-day deprivation cycle translates directly to high-stakes performance in other Tier 1 evaluations. The true metric of Ranger School cannot be found in a push-up standard or a knot-tying manual. It is found in the documented accounts from after-action interviews with the graduates. Every single man who earns the tab can pinpoint the exact moment he considered quitting. It happens at 3 in the morning in the freezing rain on the side of a mountain, when the body has nothing left to give, and the rational brain calculates that the pain is no longer worth a piece of cloth. What stops them from quitting is never motivation or patriotism. According to the Army's own psychological research, the single strongest predictor of graduation is the refusal to let down the man suffering to their left and right. When the internal ego is completely destroyed by the caloric deficit and the sleep deprivation, the only fuel source remaining is absolute accountability to the squad. The United States Army purposefully breaks these men down to their biological foundations, just to ensure that when the foundation is exposed, it is built on mutual sacrifice. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what it actually costs to wear that tab, hit the like button. Drop a comment below. Did you serve? Did you attend Ranger School? Tell us which phase broke you down the most. And share this with someone who needs to understand what leadership under real pressure actually looks like.